Good afternoon. My name is Maggie Graham, and I am the Marketing Director for Strategex. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Improve CX Using 80/20. Before we get started today, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. One, all attendees are currently on mute. We invite you to type in your questions as they arrive during the presentation. You can type them in using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will be reserving the last 10 to 15 minutes of the session for Q&A. Two, we are recording the webinar and we will provide you a link to the recording after. Finally, I'd like to introduce Strategex. Strategex is an 80/20 and customer experience management consultancy. We are relentless in our pursuit of aggressive, profitable, and sustainable growth. Today, you will hear from David Bemoras and Sharon Kottke. David is a vice president and 80/20 expert who comes to Strategex after years of leadership at Wesco International, where he was once a Strategex client. He liked us so much, he joined the team. Sharon Kottke is Managing Director of Strategex's Customer Experience Practice. She has been with Strategex for over 20 years and is a leading expert of customer research and strategic planning. David and Sharon, over to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Great, thanks Maggie, and welcome everybody and good afternoon. And thanks for taking the time to participate in today's webinar on how an 80/20 approach to your business can be a force multiplier in operationalizing a company-wide effort to consistently deliver an outstanding experience to your critically most important customers. This is foundational to any organization's ability to grow. And simply put, 80/20 creates a positive growth transformation in your business by putting hyper focus on what matters most, which what we see time and time again inevitably creates hyper results. Our agenda today, we're going to cover 4 key areas. The first of which is to help you understand how to more effectively align and mobilize your organization to deliver an exceptional customer experience. 2, we're going to talk about how you can proactively uncover and effectively monetize the significant trapped profit potential that exists within your existing customer base. We all know the most efficient way to grow your business is by monetizing the addressable opportunity that exists with existing customers. The third thing we're going to cover is how to dramatically improve profitable revenue growth by getting your sales force more focused on those parts of their portfolio that represent the highest value creation opportunity. We know that time is a gift in life, right? We can't invent more of it, right? How we choose to spend our time, particularly in the sales area of our business, has a direct impact on our ability to get a return on investment in our time, right? So, and it also is key to understand that there's no way you can deliver a great customer experience to those customers that matter most if the organization isn't making the time and putting the focus on those customers disproportionately to other customers in the portfolio that are perhaps less strategic and less value in their orientation. Fourth, we're going to make sure that the entire organization understands which customers in the organization need to be focused on. This is a very holistic approach. Manufacturing profitable growth in any business is a team sport, and aligning the entire organization around over-serving your key customers is mission critical. So what we see with a lot of our clients across all types of industries is that the biggest challenge they have in delivering an outstanding customer experience is truly believing that they have to treat all customers the same, that every customer is a good customer. Every order is a good order. And 80-20 really helps us think differently about this and why it's actually the opposite of what is true in an organization. So let me first start talking about the origins of 80-20. In the early 1900s, a sociologist by the name of Vilfredo Pareto was studying wealth distribution in the country of Switzerland. And what he found in all the towns that he studied was that 20% of the families owned 80% of the land. No matter where he went, this is what he found to be the case. So then he decided to apply his research to the agriculture industry. And for example, he found that soybean plants, 20% of the soybean plants produced 80% of the soybeans. So it was at this point that he said, okay, there's something going on here. And he pivoted his research to economics. And it was then that he really validated what became known as the law of imbalance, or what is commonly referred to today as the Pareto principle. In the early 1980s, a company called ITW in Illinois, Illinois-based company, family-owned at the time, hired a gentleman by the name of John Nichols, who had really spent some time understanding and thinking about how the 80-20 principle could apply to business. And it was foundational to the journey ITW would take over the next 25 years in becoming, quite frankly, one of the most successful business stories in all of American business. And the Nichols hypothesis, what he discovered was that while 20% of the customers produced 80% of the revenue, and 80% of the customers produced 20%, and this was something he consistently saw, he didn't believe that that was the case when it came to how overhead, energy, effort, and resource was being applied. What he found was that it was actually quite the opposite. What he found was that in most organizations, 80% of the energy, the effort, the resources were consumed with supporting the 80% of the customers that were only accounting for 20% of the revenue. Now, I know that may seem, kind of counterintuitive to a lot of you on this call, but when we study the data of most organizations, it becomes extremely apparent that there is a lot of complexity, overhead, effort, resource being consumed with these customers that are only accounting for 20% of the sales. And back in 2012, I hired Strategex at my company. We had kind of hit the wall from a profitability standpoint, and we were looking for a way to improve our operating performance. And a gentleman that worked for me, referred me to Strategex, and I hired them. And when we ran our data for the first time, I was blown away. It was really an aha moment for me because we were a very profitable company. We were actually more profitable than our peers, our competitive peers. But when we ran the data, what we found is that we actually had more transactions associated with the 80% of our revenue that was only coming from the 80% of our customers that were only accounting for 20% of our revenue. We had fewer transactions associated with the 20% of our customers who are accounting for 80% of our revenue. So this really helped us understand that there was a lot of effort going on to their business that was creating no value. It was creating no profitability. So when you look at this slide and you see what's above the black line, what we discovered, and what most organizations discover, is this is where you're making all of your profit. It's quite frankly where you're making about 150% of your profit. And it's really subsidizing all of what's going on below the black line, right? This is something that's challenging for companies to get their heads around. But once they see the data, it becomes very apparent. And once you know it, you can't unknow it, right? So the question is, what are we going to do about it? So let's go to the next slide and talk about data, right? So one of the first things we do is we run what we call a quartile analysis. This is an analysis that simply takes, it's kind of a health check for a better way of putting it, where we look at your customer base and we say, okay, if you've got, in this case, 200 customers, we put them into quartiles, all right? The first quartile typically consists of about 89% of your revenue. Time and time again, what we see is your top 25% of your customer roster will account for about 89% of your revenue. We see this across all industries, all types of companies. In my case, I think I may have broken the record. We were about 95% of revenue in quartile 1. In quartile 2, what we see is about 7% of revenue. So that next 25% of your customer roster. In quartile 3, it's about 3%. And in quartile 4, it's about 1%. But when you study the transaction data, when you really get under the covers and look at your data, what we see is that the overhead is split pretty evenly across each of these quartiles, 25, 25, 25, on or about that range. So what does that mean from a profitability standpoint? What it means, as I said a moment ago, is that the quartile 1, where you're getting about 89% of your revenue, it's contributing about 150 to 200% of your profit. Quartile 2, if you're really good, is break even. Quartile 3, you're losing money. And quartile 4, you're losing a lot of money. So I know it's hard for some of you probably to get your head around that, okay, I've got 50% of my effort supporting only 4% of my revenue. But that's what happens, because what companies do a great job of unintentionally is impose a lot of complexity on themselves by having that point of view that every order is a good order, every customer is a good customer, bring more customers, more customers, more customers, more products, right? And what that does is really create a whole lot of nothing from a profitability standpoint. So what we have to do is recognize in all organizations, we have our whales. We have those customers that matter most, where we're making most of our money, where we have continued opportunity to grow. And then we have the minnows, all right, which are consuming a lot of our time, energy, and effort and resources today, which are not infinite. So what we have to start to think about doing is thinking about how we can reapply or reallocate the resource and the effort and the energy that we have that's being consumed with the minnows and reallocate it to the whales. Now, this doesn't mean we don't treat the minnows fairly. Doesn't mean that we fire all of those small customers, although I'm sure there's some that you would like to fire, right? But what it does mean is that we have to be aware of how we take that finite amount of resources we have in the company, both in the way of human capital and economic capital, and reallocate it so that we can apply it to over-serving and delivering a world-class differentiated experience to our most important customers, right? Much easier said than done. Much easier said than done. So if we go to the next slide, you know, what we see in our world, by the way, and we all are consumers, and we all see how a lot of the organizations we choose to do business with do this very effectively, right? They understand who their whales are, and they treat them differently. They operationalize company-wide a holistic effort to deliver a differentiated level of service to those customers. And the airlines industry is probably the best at doing that, right? I'm sure some of you on the call are very frequent flyers. I'm sure some of you on the call are not such frequent flyers. But the airlines does a great job of identifying who their whales are. They operationalize processes and systems and their people to ensure that those customers experience something different. When their flights are delayed, they get a different level of treatment. they call a different phone number. When they show up to board the plane, they're treated differently. When they sit down in their seat, they're greeted differently. I can go on and on and on. Now, that doesn't mean that all of those of us that don't fly as often get bad service, but the airlines do a great job of setting a standard of expectation that is fair and appropriate, and the customer understands and accepts it, right? So the airlines don't believe every customer is the same, and they do a great job of really protecting and defending and ensuring that their customers that matter most, the ones that spend the most money, the ones that are those frequent travelers, stay with them so that they can continue to grow, because nothing creates more trouble for an organization to grow, to achieve that sustainable, profitable sales growth than customer attrition, key customer attrition, right? So what are we doing to ensure that that doesn't happen? If we go to the next slide, what we know is that every order is not a good order and every customer is not a good customer. So if anybody on the call truly believes that that is the case, then quite frankly, 80-20 is not for you, right? Because that's simply thing. Again, it doesn't mean we're going to treat customers poorly. Doesn't mean we're going to fire customers. It just means we're going to operationalize and institutionalize a culture that's much more oriented towards focusing on those that matter most and understanding why they matter most, which takes us to the key to success. You know, in business and in really trying to organize your organization to overserve and grow in a profitable and sustainable way, the first thing we need to do is ask ourselves, what does the perfect customer profile look like? Who are we going to treat differently? And there are some key questions that we would encourage you to ask. Number one, which of your current customers would use you as a reference and why? Why do they buy from you? Why are you their preferred supplier? Then ask yourself, who are our worst customers and why, regardless of size? Which of your current customers really see value in what you're delivering to them today? They see you as being an extension of their organization. Your value proposition, what it is that you do, matches very well with their needs, so that price perhaps becomes a little less relevant to them. Which of your customers create the most profit dollars, right? A lot of our clients view profit rate as a determinant for what good is in the way of a customer, right? Well, that small customer we do business with, I'd make a lot of margin on them, margin rate. But what we all know, what drives a P&L is margin dollars. And that's where your profitability is going to be. And that's why the big customers that see value in what you do, right, and really are going to contribute the majority of your profit is where you have to align your resources. And then the other thing you have to ask yourself is, which of our customers really have the opportunity for us to grow? Because there's untapped profit potential with what they're spending money on, but they're not yet spending it with you, that you can go get. And the only way you're going to go get that additional opportunity is if you're delivering a great experience to that customer, right? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon, who's going to talk in some more detail about some other insights and things to think about as you align your organization around delivering a great experience to those that matter most. Sharon, off to you.
All right, thanks, David. So one of the most common mistakes we see in businesses that we work with is how they're executing their Net Promoter Score. Now, NPS is used by organizations all around the globe to measure customer loyalty. and it's a really powerful indicator of future business growth if it's used correctly. Companies that have a high Net Promoter Score typically outpace the industry growth rate by 2 to 3x. They can sustain a price premium strategy, and organizations with a high NPS typically have lower customer churn and lower customer acquisition costs. So let's start with the NPS basics. The way NPS is calculated is by using the answer to a pretty simple question. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely is it that you would recommend a company or brand to a friend or colleague? Now we take the ratings given and we group them into different categories of respondents. The first category is promoters, and these are accounts that give a score of 9 or 10. They're rating a 9 or 10, they're loyal enthusiasts who will keep buying and refer others to your company, which will really fuel growth. Anyone that rates a 7 or 8, we put in a passive bucket. And those are satisfied customers, but not very enthusiastic about your business. And they could be swayed to look at other competitive offerings. Lastly, anyone that gives a rating from a 0 to 6, we call those detractors. And those are unhappy customers who can really damage your brand and impede growth through negative word of mouth. So how do we calculate NPS? It's pretty simple. We take the percentage of detractors and subtract that from the percentage of promoters. And an NPS score can range anywhere from negative 100 to a positive 100. Negative 100 would mean everybody that rated is a detractor. Positive 100 is everybody's a promoter. Now, one of my favorite examples of NPS is when an acquaintance comes to Chicago and asks for a recommendation of a steakhouse, right? When I give my recommendation, I'm putting my reputation on the line and endorsing a place for them to spend their time and resources, at my recommendation. Because I love food, it's not hard for me. I don't hesitate telling them where I would avoid due to bad quality or poor service. But my favorite steakhouse in Chicago is RPM. I think their service is exceptional. And for me, it's all about the sides, and their sides are trade-worthy. So NPS seems pretty simple enough, right? But how are companies getting it wrong? Well, what we find is the vast majorities of companies are not using a focused approach. So many companies are measuring their NPS by sending an email post-transaction. The problem with that method is twofold. First, more times than not, the person placing that B2B transaction is not the key decision maker. They may have little to no influence at all on the purchase. The second mistake we see is every response or rating is counted equally. So think back to the quartiles that David shared a minute ago. When we calculate NPS the textbook way, customer number 200 carries as much weight as customer number 1, which is fundamentally flawed since customer number 1 can generate over 10,000% more revenue than customer number 200. So at Strategex, we recommend taking that focused approach to measuring NPS. We want to focus on quartile 1. Remember, quartile 1 is about 90% of your revenue and 150% of your profit. The scores your top accounts give you should be much higher than industry standards. What we really want to see is those very top accounts, that quartile 1 in the world-class range of 75 to 100. So the next time you're looking at a B2B NPS, ask yourself, is this score telling me the story of the insignificant many, the 75% of customers that account for less than 15% of revenue? Or is this NPS sharing the story of your top accounts, those critical few that are driving 150% of your profit? Another common mistake we see in our CX work is the belief that price outweighs value. The cost of products is rarely the number one determining factor for which a supplier is chosen. And I don't know about you, David, but when I'm looking for solutions in my business, I almost never go with the lowest bid. It just doesn't provide the value that I'm looking for at the level I need it. So I want someone there 24/7 in case anything needs to be resolved. And I want a solution that makes my team as efficient as they possibly can be. But time and time again, when we talk to organizations, they just, assume that price is the end all be all. And if they have to raise prices, we hear it's probably not a good time to talk to customers. Well, I would argue that during a price increase period, you should be over communicating with your top accounts. Be proactive in letting them know why prices are going up, and be as transparent as you can be. And at the same time, listen to your customers. Let them feel heard and understood, and this will really lead to trust in the relationship. I know, David, in some of our conversations, you shared a best practice that you implemented in the past during a price increase period. Want to share what you did?
Yeah. So it was an interesting story. This goes back a number of years, but very similar to what we're seeing today. In today's business world, the price of copper, we sold a lot of wiring cable related type products back in my prior life. And the price of copper was accelerating very quickly. And that really required us to raise prices to our customers pretty substantially, and not too similar to what's happening today. And we made a decision, because we know that raising prices is always very challenging. We made a decision that we would be a thought leader, that we would take the time to do a lot of the research and investigate as to what the drivers were behind the copper increases, what the forecast was, what to expect. And we actually created a newsletter that we sent out on a weekly basis. We showed people what the trends were and what the forecasters were predicting in the way of future increases or decreases. And what that really did was endear us to our customers, that we were informing them and helping them understand, so perhaps they could explain to their customers how the price increases we were going to soon be giving them could be passed along to their own customers. And this made it much easier for us to raise our prices when we did this. It established ourselves as something other than just a supplier of stuff, but more as a trusted advisor and an extension of their business. And it's those little things that really make a big difference in creating an experience that differentiates you from competition. Now, we sent this newsletter out to everybody, but it was really intended for the key customers that were going to be most impacted by the commodity price of copper going up as fast as it did.
That's such a great approach, and certainly applicable in today's climate, right? So when we
you got to communicate, Sharon. You got to be transparent.
Yeah.
You got to communicate. You can't be afraid to deliver bad news,
Yeah.
especially to your most important customer.
Don't raise the price and run.
Right.
So when we talk about raising prices, the best companies out there have really earned the right to be a premium price supplier. And in the example on this slide, we see scores from 4 respondents at one of our clients' top accounts. So they're all 4 in the same account, which was a top account for our customer. What we heard from these customers was that our client made a good quality product. You see they scored a 9.3 in quality and a 9.5 in reliability of the performance of the product. But they were very difficult to work with. The ease of doing business score was rated on average of 5 on that 1 to 10 scale. The respondents cited little to no proactive engagement, difficulty with our client's ordering process, and really poor customer service, and they were a pain to negotiate with. The only reason they were purchasing at all was because of the quality of the product, which covers a lot of sins, but isn't going to get you where you need to be. So with the poor lead times, the miserable customer experience, the account started shifting their business to other suppliers because they didn't feel the value for the price they were paying was there. The customer voiced to us there was no way they could see scaling the business with our client the way things are going. Now, compare the previous slide to the scores we received for a separate client that we worked with, where we asked very similar touch point questions. The customer experience we saw here was totally different. This client was seen as very easy to work with. They scored a 9.8 in ease of doing business. They received high scores throughout all the various aspects of the relationship. They were called out for being proactive, responsive. They really listened to their customers, and they had a partnership rapport. Now, they were a premium price supplier in the industry, but customers saw the value for working with this client. You'll see the price for value score is an 8.8. And typically when we see scores this high across the touch points, we often recommend our clients take a look at their pricing strategies, as they may be leaving money on the table. With the experience that this customer was providing with their top accounts, they certainly were able to command a higher price premium. The last mistake we'll talk about today is that we so often see in our 80-20 and customer experience work is so many organizations are using an outdated sales approach. They're working to sell a large pool of SKUs that they may have been selling and expanding on for decades. But rarely are they working one-on-one with those top accounts to co-engineer and co-develop solutions to address real-world pain points and applications that their customers are looking for. They're not on-site listening. We believe sales needs to be solution-oriented, not product-driven. Here's a quote we heard from a customer of one of our clients. They need to make sure they're taking the time to listen to the customer as opposed to telling us what's in their catalog. I'd like to see on-site involvement and understanding of what direction our business is heading. What types of parts are we working on, and where can they support us? We really need them to listen. I can't tell you how many times respondents share this sentiment with our team. So many times we hear, well, their breadth of product is almost too big, but they're not hitting the bullseye on exactly what we need. Sales guys are taught, here's what we make, here's what we do, now go sell it. Rather than taking the time and approach of listening and addressing the pain points for their top accounts and the target accounts that they're going after. So a solution-oriented approach goes above and beyond the typical sales approach. It's the team going in to help identify the source of a challenge and look for a better way of doing things. David, I know you've had great success implementing a solution-oriented strategy as a way of breaking barriers into target large accounts. Do you mind sharing an example that you've implemented?
Yeah, so I think it really goes back. You have to start with really going through your customer portfolio and saying which customers match our perfect customer profile, from profitability standpoint, a size standpoint, an addressable opportunity standpoint, overall how they feel about what it is that we do, and does it really match up with their most important needs. So when we did 80-20, we made a decision to go through an entire customer roster and identify customers that we needed to invest in and treat differently. And I don't mean a little differently, I mean a lot differently. And there was one customer in particular that we were doing a little bit of business with, but happened to be a global Fortune 500 technology company in the cloud computing space. And we were doing a little bit of business, and we had made a conscious decision that they would be a target. We wanted them to be a super 80, right? A key account for the organization because their business matched really well with our capabilities, but we, up until that point, were really underserving them. right? And quite frankly, under engaging them. So we took the time to do research and understand what it is exactly that mattered most to them. And what mattered most to them was having the critical materials they needed in every one of their data centers across the globe. And we had heard that our competition wasn't perhaps doing this as well as the client, the customer needed them to. So we developed, did a lot of work in talking to different stakeholders within the organization, got a couple of people to kind of be our coach and giving us information. And then we created a customized solution that was very much oriented towards the stuff that was keeping them up at night, which was losing those small parts and pieces that had to keep things moving and working in the data centers, because every second of downtime was costing them millions of dollars, potentially. And it was this approach that really endeared us to them. It separated us from the competition. We organized a team of people to execute and operationalize the deliverables that we committed to. And we presented that solution to the customer, and we won a substantial more of their business. And it actually ended up becoming the largest account in the portfolio. So the takeaway here is delivering a solution requires information. You must make the time to invest and understand what it is that matters most to your customer, what it is that's keeping them up at night, what are their business priorities, what's going to create the most economic benefit to their organization, and then you deliver a solution that matches those requirements. You can't do this for everybody, right? So choosing the right ones matters, because if you make the wrong choices, you're going to spend a lot of time and effort that isn't going to bear any fruit. But when you do this, you make a good choice based on a sound set of criteria, and you take this very proactive, understanding approach to the things that matter most and develop a specific solution around that, it's very hard not to win. And by the way, not on price. And I just want to amplify a point Sharon made earlier. Those companies that feel price is the only thing that matters inherently aren't really delivering value to their customers, right? Those that really think price is the determinant decision maker on whether they get business and the one that matters most probably need to do some soul searching on whether or not they are doing the type of solutions oriented selling that I just described. Now, do you do this with your minnows? No. But do you organize your organization to do this for the whales? Absolutely. And that in of itself will create growth with those accounts. You'll protect them and defend them more effectively, and you'll make price less relevant in the end.
Yeah. I mean, that's why 80/20 is so critical at this, because like you said, you can't do this for everybody. You really have to identify those top accounts and put the focus there. All right, so one of the tools that we encourage our clients to develop is what we call a Raving fan storybook. You want to make sure your top accounts are just that, raving fans. And I'm not opposed to your customers painting your logo on their chest, right? I mean, you want that level of loyalty. Now, the storybook acts as a blueprint and a history of the relationship, so you can keep doing what works and correct anything that needs improving. This tool gives your team and their team a complete understanding of top accounts' current and historical customer experience. We typically recommend 6 chapters to track. First is a list of everything your top account purchases from you, whether it's equipment, aftermarket parts, or add-on services. Second, you want to create a scorecard and really measure your performance. Are you delivering in spec, on time, in full? Track the performance that you're giving at the various commercial touch points of the relationship. The third section should be the shortest section, complaints and resolution. And what you want to do here is make sure you're taking notes on any issues or problems the customer has incurred And most importantly, document how the issue was resolved. What did your company do to address the complaints, and how quickly was a resolution implemented? Section 4 and 5 are built to show the partnership efforts. Track ways your organization has worked on solutions for this top account around cost reductions, as well as innovations you've partnered on. And lastly, section 6, track the positive feedback you're receiving. There's nothing better than spreading the praise your team has worked so hard to obtain. One of our clients actually went so far as installing big LCD screens all around the plant in multiple locations that continuously looped quotes from their top accounts, and it was so motivational. Now, once you implement the Storybook tool, and again, this is for just the top of top accounts, it can be used for marketing initiatives and growing share, as well as attracting new whale customers. One company that we worked with used the Raving fan Storybook approach, and they used it for their #1 account, which at the time was Kraft. In 2012, when Kraft spun Mondelez off, our client was able to use the Storybook to show Mondelez everything they had done for Kraft. And Mondelez ended up choosing our client and retained their services for their business as well. So creating and maintaining that Storybook had a huge return in investment for our client.
Sharon, the only thing, I think we all know, customers do a great job of taking for granted the great things that we do for them. So it's really good, especially with those that matter most, to have that Storybook handy when the time comes for you to remind them about just what a great job we're doing for them and how intent we are on having that continue, right? That we're tracking our own performance, and you got to remind them every now and then of the great things that you're doing for them.
Absolutely. I mean, it works.
Yeah.
So now that we've gone through some common mistakes that we see most often, I thought I'd share a case study for you. This is a company that we're currently working with for both 80/20 and CS. The division we're using in this example is an $88 million division. And their #1 client brought in 10% of the revenue at about $8.7 million. We interviewed multiple individuals at this top account, and we found that they saw our client as pretty weak in innovations. They didn't have the breadth of portfolio that their customer really needed, and they were seen as difficult to work with. I want to say their NPS was about a 33, so average at best, nowhere near that world-class range for a top account. And the relationship aspects and commercial touch points were in that 4.3 to 8.7 range. So nothing really stellar at all. So Strategex worked with the client closely to get this account to perfect. And yes, that was the goal, 1 to perfect. We helped our client create a Raving fan team that was responsible for ensuring every commercial and service touch point was top notch for this account. There were dedicated resources whose sole responsibility was making sure that this customer had the white glove treatment. The objectives were clear: 100% on time in full, proactive engagement, simplification of the ordering process, noticeable responsiveness, and ultimately just delighting this customer. Well, the investment paid off. Noticeable results were achieved in just a matter of months. With that intent and focus and strategy, it really worked. Today, our client is seen as the top customer's best supplier. They're partnering together on development of new products. And our client was able to implement a price increase of 20 to 30% on secondary products, as well as a 5% increase on those tier 1 products. The value for the customer was clear, and there is now a true partnership there that is leading to growth in both organizations. So really, what does it all boil down to? It's those top accounts. The customer experience has to be exceptional. And David, as you talked about at the beginning of our session, the only way to do this is to really know who your 80s are. Who are the critical few accounts that are driving over 80% of your revenue? And combining that 80-20 principle with the in-depth customer insights, it really enables companies to become intimate with their top accounts. And that loyal partnership relationship enables our clients to achieve that profitable growth.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest, in my experience, the biggest limiting factors to sustainable profitable growth is key customer attrition, number one. And number two, being able to put yourself in a position to earn the right. The operative word is earn the right to get more of what they have the money to spend on your products, right? Unless you're getting 100% of their business, which you may be in some cases, there's always that trapped profit potential that you can further monetize. So it's so important that you apply these principles that we talked about today to put yourself in a position to, one, make sure you're not losing your top accounts, two, that you're making price a little less relevant, and three, you're putting yourself in a position to earn the right to get more of what they have to give you.
That's great. All right, we'll turn it over to Maggie. Maggie, any questions coming in?
Yes, actually. Before we get started, though, as a reminder, if you have any questions, please send them in via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom application. And I thought I would just take a quick moment to recommend following Strategex on LinkedIn to stay up to date on all of our thought leadership surrounding customer experience and 80-20 and future webinars, of course. So the first question that we have coming in is, how would you recommend approaching the stratification of our customer portfolio?
Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to do a quartile analysis. And there's a couple of very simple steps to take, right? One is first create that perfect customer profile, right? And then look at all of the customers that are in that upper quartile and say, okay, of all the customers we have, these are the ones that match this profile. Now, there may be some in there that you're doing a lot of business with today that aren't profitable, that are kind of a pain in the butt, right, to do business with, right? That may be the case, right? So you might want to find a way to de-emphasize those accounts, but you got to pick the ones that match that perfect prospect profile. The second thing you need to do is look at those minnows and ask yourself, which of these minnows have the organizational profile of the companies that are our top accounts? The ones that are the true whales, the ones that we want to continue to invest in. What companies are we doing a little bit of business with, but have the potential to become a whale? And if we treat them differently with purpose and intent and focus and resource, they can migrate into becoming that whale. So now you've got your existing whales, you've got your potential whales, and you've got everybody else, right? Put it into those three categories. This is and I think what you'll find is that it's be much easier to align your resources and create your different service models and engagement models in those three different buckets.
Great. Our next question is, how do you help teams learn how to treat customers differently?
Well, the first thing is to know who those top accounts are. And, we do that by going through the data, and as David said, that quartile analysis. Once you know who quartile 1 is, you've got to spread the 80-20 principle throughout the organization, right? I mean, it can't just be with senior management. It's got to be every executive, sales, operations, R&D focus has to know who those top accounts are. We have a client that actually went and put, huge signs taped up on the walls so-and-so is account number 1, so-and-so is account number 2. And any order that came in for those customers were priority number 1. It was communicated throughout the organization, and it was a practice that they really lived from top down to treat those top accounts differently. So know who they are and communicate that through the organization and put that focus and dedicated resources on to treating them differently.
Yeah, and bringing a cross-functional team of people together to develop that Raving fans playbook so that you can ultimately create the Raving fans storybook, right? So it really, again, you can't do this for everybody, but delivering the kind of experience we're talking about today, the one that's going to create that stickier, more profitable, price less relevant relationship, it's a team sport, right? So it's not just a sales force, right? So bring all the stakeholders in the organization that are going to work together to deliver that differentiated experience. Create the playbook, and you'll always deliver a great outcome.
Great. Do you find these best practices still apply if I primarily sell through distribution? I don't really have much control over the customer experience.
Yeah, well, if you're a manufacturer selling through distribution, your customer is your distributor. So you have to work with them in making it easy for them to represent and distribute your product to the end user. You also have to train and educate them on what your value proposition is and how to deliver that value proposition on your product, your services, whatever else it is you may have that you're offering to the end user. They're an extension of your sales force, right? So you really need to overserve those distributors with support, resources, training, and then monitor very closely what is the end result to the end user, right? And the customer insights type of resource that we've talked about today is exceptionally effective when you're selling through distribution. Right? You need to have that end user voice of the customer feedback, because what you might be hearing from your distributor might not be what is reality, right? So it's really a little bit more complex when you're selling through distribution, but you've really got to work that much harder to overserve those key distributors of yours in making sure that they are representing you and your value proposition as effectively as possible.
Yeah, and I would say even through distribution, know who the top end users are. And we encourage our customers to get close with those end users that are going through distribution. Be solutions oriented. Be there to understand and hear, and don't let your distributors see this as a threat. They should see this as a winning strategy for growing share with this end customer.
Great. Okay, currently we are experiencing cost of material increases from our suppliers, and we're having to pass this down to our customers. Wouldn't it be a horrible time to try to interview them? Won't the price increases affect our NPS?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate some of what we talked about earlier, Maggie. The key here is, and this is, we're in a real world environment right now where, inflationary pressures are all over the place, right? And in particular with your key customers, the most important thing you can do is be transparent. Bring them information. Share with them the reasons for the increases, the direct impact effect it's having on specific products that you're selling to them. Give them the opportunity to prepare. Don't surprise them. And I think what you'll find is it'll be much easier to get your price increases through. But at the same time, you're presenting yourself as a trusted advisor and someone that really has taken a sincere interest in having empathy for the impact these price increases might have on their business, as opposed to lots of companies that just say your price is going up next week because my price went up. Wrong, right? Not with your key customers. You might get away with that with the minnows that don't have the potential to be whales one day. But with your quartile 1 customers and your high value targets that match that perfect customer profile, you've got to be extremely transparent and forthcoming, and you'll probably get your price increase through, and you'll endear yourself more to the customer for having taken that approach.
Great. Well, that wraps up our Q&A just in time. Thank you again to David and to Sharon and to everyone on the line. Thanks for joining us today. We will be sending out the recording, so keep your eyes peeled in your inbox for Strategex mail. And feel free to follow Strategex on LinkedIn or Facebook, Instagram, Twitter to stay up to date on our thought leadership and future webinars. Thank you again for your time today.